Hi everyone, it's Lynn Dion from Pink Whisper Designs. Today I thought it would be really fun just to mix up a bunch of our products, some glitter, some stencils, some dyes, some distress oxides and distress glazes and spritzes, and let's go ahead and get started. We'll be using some Tim Holtz heavy stock. This is a mixed media heavy stock, so it's nice and thick. And we're going to do some stenciling. I've got the Stampers Anonymous mini layering stencils. We're going to grab that tree, but this little set comes with these two others as well. So these are really fun. These are great for doing your backgrounds. Those other two stencils are perfect for your backgrounds and for using some of your texture paste. So I'm placing this on my Wendy Vecchi Make Art station, and I'm going to just mask off that little star at the top. We're not going to be using that today. We're going to be adding a star of our own later on. With Evergreen Bough, Salvaged Patina, and Cracked Pistachio, I'm going to do some ink blending. So the effect I was going for here was kind of an ombre effect. I want to start down at the bottom of this tree with the darkest color, and I'm just using a blending brush to do that. I did decide to mask off the two sides. We will be die cutting this into the shape of a triangle, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't get any excess ink on there. So just for precautionary purposes, I did mask off the two sides of that stencil. And then I'm starting with my darker color. So the Evergreen Bough, and I'm going to blend that in, and I don't want to perfectly fill in the circles going up. I want to overlap this second color. So I'll grab the Salvaged Patina, and then I'm going to overlap it into some of that Evergreen Bough so that I get kind of a mix of colors there. And then I'm going back to that Evergreen Bough and just adding a little bit more and doing some blending. You can blend this all again at the very end as well. And then with the Cracked Pistachio, I'm going to do the top of the tree. So this is a really pretty combination, and when these colors overlap, it's a really nice look. So here you just see me doing a little bit more blending. I'm darkening it up just a little bit more, and then look how pretty this tree is. But we're not done with this tree. What we're going to do is add the Distress Embossing Glazes to this. In the Evergreen Bough, the Salvaged Patina, and the Cracked Pistachio, just like we did with the inks. So I matched up the inks with the Distress Glaze. I'm going to sprinkle it on, and you can see that I'm just kind of letting it go up into that second color a little bit, just like we did with the inks. I'm going to tap away any excess. I do like to grab separate little pieces of paper when I'm doing this. I don't want to contaminate my embossing powders. So now I'll place that second color on. I will overlap that powder, but I've already tapped away the excess, so I'm not going to get any that will go back into my container. And then we'll take that third color and we'll do the same thing. So we're going to sprinkle it right over the top. Now, I do want to mention that the glazes, you can see through them. So if you were to have stamped anything underneath there, it would show through, which is really fun. I've done that in other videos, but for this I decided just to enhance these little bubbles with a tint of each of those colors. So you want to tap away any excess. I'm using a brush here just to brush away any excess powders, and then I'll go ahead and heat set that with my heat it tool. And then you'll see when these glazes are embossed, you get this really pretty sheen to them. It's really shiny and glossy looking. I really love how this looks. So we get that really pretty ombre look by mixing our colors. So you can mix any colors you want here. You could do a rainbow of colors. That would be fun. But for this second one, and we're making two cards today, for the second one I'm going to do some reds and pinks. Let's go ahead and mask off the sides and that little star again. And this time I've got Lumberjack Plaid, Candied Apple, and Picked Raspberry. And again, we'll be matching up those Distress Glazes with these three colors. So let's start with our darker red. I'm going to put a nice coating of that on. And then we're not going to complete all of those bubbles. We're going to mix in the second color, the Candied Apple, up into that darker red. So let's overlap those two. And again, you get that nice third color in the middle. And then for the last color, I decided to use the picked raspberry just to brighten up the top of this tree a little bit. And again, we want to blend those colors together. So I'm going back with my brush just to do a little bit more blending, and I did want to darken up the bottom of this tree a little bit more. Let's go ahead and remove that stencil. And then again, we're going to go back to those embossing glaze, the distress glazes. And again, I've got the 3 matching colors, and you can see those there. So this was really fun. It was fun to pull out the glazes and match them up to the ink pads. And it does give this little tree so much personality. It really brings out that glossy finish. I probably should have shaken up these powders a little bit. It's nothing to worry about that they're coming out clumpy. I just should have shaken those little containers a little bit just to not have those little clumps pour out. You'd think I would have learned that with the first one, but then you see I did it again here. So you'll probably want to shake those up a little bit before you sprinkle those on. And again, I'm letting those colors overlap. And I'm using a separate sheet of paper for each color. You could use a coffee filter to do this, or a little plastic container. But I don't want to contaminate my embossing powder, so that's why I'm doing it this way. So let's place all that excess right back in the containers, and then we'll go ahead and heat set this just like we did before. And cleaning off any excess powder. I love this red one, it's so pretty. I like both of them. And again, pull out your glazes and your inks and just match up some, make some really interesting combinations. So now I've got a triangle die. And this I've had in my stash for a little while, so I just pulled out the one that I had. I will list and link some down below for you in case you don't have any. But you could certainly always just cut a triangle just using your paper trimmer. But I decided to use my die, just made it easier. And then I'm going to the Distress Oxide. I'm starting off with the antique linen. I'm placing it all over, and you can see I'm going right over those little bubbles. And then what I can do is just take a dry paper towel and wipe off any of that excess that gets on that glaze. And then I'll come in with the walnut stain and just darken up those edges. And that's going to frame this tree nicely. And we'll go ahead and we'll do the same thing for this second one. And again, when you're done, just wipe off any excess on top of that glaze, and it will come right off. And you can just buff that away. So now that we have those 2 trees done, let's go ahead and grab one of these reindeer. And I'm going to grab this one here. And I die cut 4 of them. And this is from the Holtz Sizzix Fling Deer set. And I've had this for a little bit of time. What I wanted to do today was just mix and match a lot of the things. Some of them I've had for a while, some of them are new. Just kind of mix and match some of my sets and use up some of our different products that I know we all have them, we love them, but sometimes we're not sure exactly what to do. So I thought I would just kind of mix up these sets and have some fun. So I glued 2 of the reindeer together, and then I'm just going to go back to those same 2 inks, the antique linen. I'll just cover them completely in that. And then a little bit of walnut stain for some shadowing. You could certainly color these with your markers if you want a little more detail, but I just thought I'd keep this nice and simple. I'm coming up kind of from the bottom. I'll darken up the little antlers, and then I'll come up from the bottom and just keep the top area of these little deer the lightest. Let's do the same thing for that second one. And now let's go to the Holtz Sizzix Thinlits. This is from the Vault series, and this is called the Holiday Classic. So this was released recently, and I'm going to die cut the word peace, and I die cut it twice. Once from some metallic cardstock. That's from the Holtz Ideology Metallic Classics. And then once from that heavy stock. And then I die cut a bunch of the greenery and the two of the small flowers from this set. I'm going to just color those. I'm using Salvaged Patina for these little branches, and then I'll darken those up with a little bit of the evergreen bough. I'm just adding a little shadow of that to these. Again, some quick coloring. And again, you could use your markers or anything else you prefer to use, but I just wanted to keep this simple and easy. So I'm going to use the cracked pistachio for these, and then I did pull out my rustic wilderness ink pad to add a little shadowing to these. So I did all of those the same, and then I grabbed the picked raspberry for the center of my poinsettia, and then the lumberjack plaid, and I'm going to go from the tips of the flowers in towards the center, and then we'll just blend that out. That lumberjack plaid ink pad was very wet, so I got a little more ink that I wanted, but it did blend out nicely, and you can always come back with a little bit more pink if you prefer. Now this cardstock, this is from the Tim Holtz Ideology Christmas backdrops, and this was released in 2023, but I am going to list down below one that's very similar that is currently available, and you could even just stamp some text. I was just kind of going for that text look in the background, so certainly grab your text stamps and you can do this as well, but I will list that paper pad that is currently available. And then back to the antique linen and the walnut stain, and let's just bring a little bit of that antique linen into the cardstock, and then a little bit of walnut stain around the edges just to frame everything nicely. And this is going to tie everything together. So next, what we'll do is grab the Distress Spritz, and we're going to spatter that on each of these panels just for a little bit of shimmer. So I finished those two up. We'll take the Distress Spritz in the cracked pistachio, again matching up the colors with what we've already done. You want to make sure you shake that up really well, and then I'm just going to dip that nozzle right into the container and spatter this panel. And then what I'll do is heat set that quickly so that I can spatter on the second color, which is the Lumberjack Plaid. So do make sure you shake those up really well. You want to get that mixed up, and then when you spatter it, you'll get that beautiful shimmer. These are really fun to use. You can just spray them right from the container. You could do a whole background with these. They're absolutely gorgeous. I just love that spattered look, so that's what I decided to do. And then I'll heat set this as well. Once that was done, I took some of some white Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock, and this is a 100-pound weight, and I just cut a strip of it, and I'm going to add this to the bottom of these panels. So I just tore it. I tore it from front to back to get that kind of ruffled edge. So you want to tear it towards you and then away from you. And then I'm going to place the trees down. I've got the Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, and I'll place these kind of off to the left-hand side of the panel, right along the bottom edge. And then I'm going to pop up this little snowy border. So let's put some tape on here. This is a nice thick tape, and I'm putting a strip of it on each of these. And then later on, I did decide to add another snowy border. So I used that leftover bit that I had tore off of this piece, and we're going to add that. But for now, let's go ahead and add the little reindeer. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how far down I want him, because he is going to be sitting behind that snowy border. So I added some glue to that, some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive to that, and then I glued those down. Now we can go ahead and add the snow. Once that's attached, let's go ahead and attach the piece. Now that set did have Peace and Wish and Noel, so you could use any of those. I decided to go with the Peace because it was a little bit longer, and I wanted it to kind of go across the tree a little bit. And then I squeezed some of that Nuvo Deluxe adhesive out, and I'm just using my finger to run a little bit of that glue right along the top of that snowy border. And now I've got the Rock Candy glitter from Tim Holtz, and I'm going to sprinkle it right along the top, and we'll get a nice little sparkle there on that snow. Let's go ahead and do that same thing for this second one. You could certainly use a brush for this if you prefer, but if I use my finger, I feel like I get a nice blending of it. Let's create the card base. So I've got some craft heavy stock from Holtz, and I'm just cutting it to 4 1/4 by 11 inches, and I've scored it at 5 1/2 inches. So that'll be, again, that standard A2 size card. So let's go ahead and attach these panels. So this card will open like a book. Usually I do the top folding cards, but I decided to mix it up a little bit, and then we'll attach this one as well. So do keep in mind that all the products I'm using today are listed and linked down below and also on my blog. And if you do use those links that I've provided, I do receive a small commission, but it's at no additional cost to you. And I really do appreciate when you use those. Thank you so much for those of you who do. And then I added a little bit of that craft tape just so it would be the same height, a little square of it behind each of these flowers, and that'll lay nice and flush against that snowy bank. And then let's go ahead and attach some greenery. And I just kind of wanted to create like a little spray down here at the bottom. You could certainly add a lot more greenery if you prefer, whatever you like. You know, build a whole little area of greenery down here, have it sticking up from the top as well. But again, I just wanted to go for a little simple spray right across the bottom. And you can curl up those little branches a little bit with your fingers just to give them a little bit more dimension. So once I've tucked those in, I decided we needed to add a little bit of sparkle to the trees, of course. So I'm going to grab the Pink and Main Gypsy Confetti, and I just love these. I know I use these in a couple of videos, but I just think they're so pretty. They're little sequins. They don't have the holes in them, and they're just so shiny, and they pick up some of the colors around them. So I grabbed one of the larger ones and then one of the smaller ones, and I'm gluing one inside the other, just for a little bit more dimension on that flower. And then I'm going to sprinkle these around this little tree, just as like little ornaments, and again for a little bit more sparkle. I'm using my little pickup tool to place those down. It just makes it a lot easier to attach these. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing for the second tree. Now I wanted a little star for the top of my tree, so I went to my Buttons Galore and More. This little collection, I will list this for you too. And there's a little star inside this collection. It's like a beach collection, but it had this really pretty little crystal star. I'm going to place one of those on the top of each of the trees just to finish that off. And then with the metallic sticker book from Holtz Ideology, I'm going to grab some stickers. There are black with gold letters, which you could certainly use. I decided to use the white with the gold letters. And I'm going to grab a couple sentiments from this set. This first one says, "Shine like the stars." And the second one says, "A beautiful world." And I'm attaching it to some of that heavy stock and just leaving a little border right around the edges, maybe like 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, I'll say. And then I'm just going to trim those down. I'm using my Holtz mini paper trimmer to trim those down. And then we'll finish off the edges of these, again with a little bit of that walnut stain just to finish these off. So let's go back to that ink and just brush a little bit of this. I'm just picking these up and brushing it right around the edges. I'm coming in a little bit to that white sticker, but not too much. I don't want them to look like stickers, so I just thought by backing it with a little bit of that cardstock and then adding a little inking, you kind of get a more, I don't know, just a more interesting look from these little stickers. So once I had that done, we can go ahead and pop these up. I've got some scrapbook.com little mini foam squares. These are the small ones, and I'm going to place those along the back of each of these. And then we'll remove the backing using the Cricut weeding tool and attach these. I am covering that little gingerbread sentiment there, but that just was a coincidence because I was going to place these here anyway, but it worked out well. So I'm just going to cover that, and then let's attach this second one in that same place. Now before we use the rock candy glitter for the top of the snow, but I decided I wanted something a little chunkier. So I'm using the mica flakes and the multi-matte medium, and we're going to place some of these little, I want to think that they're going to look a little like icicles on the ends of the petals of the flower. So I'm using that multi-medium matte glue, and then I'm going to sprinkle on some of these mica flakes, and I'm just kind of pinching them and dropping them on. Now what you can do is just let that dry and then knock away any extras once you're done. Just let that sit and dry. Do be careful though, because that red ink did want to bleed a little bit when I was putting the glue on there. So you do want to be careful of that. So just kind of drop that the mica flakes on there, let it dry, and then you can tap away any extras or any excess. And then I've got my black gel pen, and I'm placing a little dot for the eyes on each of those deer, and then a few little white spots on the back of the deer. Again, just for a little interest, and then I'll also use that white pen to add a few highlights to each of these reindeer. And that'll just make these pop off the page a little bit more. So I did that for both of them. And then I decided to add a little bit to the petals on the flowers, just for a little bit more interest. Now here's where I took the leftover piece from when I tore those borders, which were about 1.25 inches wide, I want to say, or maybe 1.5 inches. And that was the leftover piece, and I did decide I wanted to add those to the bottom of the card. So I went back with that glue and that rock candy glitter and did a second border, and I'm going to glue this flat against that first one. And I really thought that finished it off. Just added a little bit more interest down at the bottom. So let's do that second one the same way. And the last step is just to take some of that walnut stain and just finish off those edges. And that'll make it blend in with everything else that we've already done. So I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. Let's go ahead and take a look at the finished cards. I'll give you a closer look at these. And I just love these trees and that glaze on the trees. And I just love the spattering in the background. We get that beautiful shimmer from that distressed spritz. So this was really fun. And again, I kind of wanted to mix up some of my products and use some things I hadn't used, and then use some older products, because I know a lot of you have these items already, and we all collect all of these. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. And I thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.